Night had fallen, a cold, moonless night. Ravendale was still. The silence was broken only by the rustling leaves. A chill wind blew through the town. It carried a sense of unease. Something was wrong.
Laura Turner was gone. She vanished without a trace. Her disappearance sent shockwaves through the quiet town. Laura was a talented violinist. She lived alone in a small cottage by the woods.
Sheriff Davis stood outside Laura's cottage. He was a tall, burly man with a worried frown. He looked at the dark windows. The front door was slightly ajar. A chill ran down his spine. This was no ordinary disappearance.
Get me Detective Bennett. This looks bad.
Detective Sam Bennett arrived at Willow Creek, a small, picturesque village nestled in the countryside. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine trees filled his lungs as he took in the serene surroundings. He had been called here to investigate the mysterious disappearance of a renowned violinist, Laura Whitmore. The cottage was small and quaint, with an air of rustic charm that seemed almost out of place in the modern world. It stood alone at the edge of the village, surrounded by a garden that had seen better days. It had a thatched roof and ivy-covered walls, giving it a storybook appearance. The ivy clung to the walls like a protective embrace, adding to the cottage's mysterious allure. The windows were dark, like empty eyes staring out into the world. They seemed to hold secrets, whispering tales of the past to those who dared to listen. He stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. The interior was just as he had imagined, cozy, yet filled with an eerie silence that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up.
The air was heavy with the scent of lavender and dust, a combination that was both soothing and unsettling. It was as if the room had been frozen in time, waiting for its occupant to return. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows that danced on the walls. The flickering light added to the room's mysterious atmosphere, making it feel both warm and foreboding. A half-finished cup of tea sat on the table, its contents long gone cold. The violin case lay open on the floor, but the instrument it once held was nowhere to be seen. The violin was gone, and with it, Laura.
Sam examined the room carefully, his trained eyes scanning every detail. He knew that even the smallest clue could be the key to solving the mystery. There were no signs of a struggle, nothing to indicate that Laura had left in a hurry. Everything was in its place, as if she had simply vanished into thin air. He found a single muddy footprint near the fireplace, a stark contrast to the otherwise tidy room. It was the only sign that someone else had been there. It was large and distinct, too large to be Laura's. This footprint was a clue, a thread that could unravel the entire mystery. This was his only lead, and he knew he had to follow it. Every detail mattered, and he couldn't afford to overlook anything.
He pocketed the evidence bag, carefully sealing the footprint sample inside. This was a crucial piece of the puzzle. His jaw set with determination, Sam vowed to find Laura. He would not rest until he uncovered the truth behind her disappearance.
Outside, the wind howled. The trees swayed ominously, their branches creaking and groaning under the force of the gale. The night was dark, with only the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the eerie scene. The air was thick with the scent of rain and the promise of a storm. Sam walked around the cottage, his footsteps muffled by the wet ground. He noticed something strange, a sense of unease settling in his stomach. The cottage, usually a place of refuge, now seemed to hold secrets in its shadows. The ground was soft from recent rain, each step sinking slightly into the mud. Puddles reflected the dim light from the cottage windows, creating an almost surreal landscape. Yet there were no footprints leading away from the cottage. It was as if whoever had been there had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind, except for the single muddy footprint inside. It stood out starkly against the wooden floor, a silent testament to an intruder's presence.
He examined the woods behind the cottage, his eyes scanning the dense underbrush for any signs of movement. The forest was thick, almost impenetrable, and it seemed to close in around him. The trees were dense, their branches intertwined like the fingers of a giant hand. The canopy above blocked out most of the moonlight, casting deep shadows on the forest floor. The darkness seemed deeper here, more oppressive. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig seemed amplified in the stillness of the night. He felt a shiver down his spine, a primal fear that he couldn't quite shake. It was as if the forest itself was watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. Someone was watching him. He could feel it, a pair of unseen eyes tracking his every move. He turned slowly, trying to catch a glimpse of his observer, but saw nothing.
He pulled out his flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. The light revealed twisted roots and gnarled branches, but no sign of life. He searched for any sign, any clue that might explain the strange occurrences. His mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. He found a torn piece of fabric caught on a thorny bush. It fluttered in the wind, a small but significant piece of evidence. It was a piece of a dark coat, rough to the touch. The fabric was worn, as if it had been through many hardships. He recognized the fabric. It was the same as the coat worn by a drifter who had recently arrived in town. The drifter had been a mysterious figure, keeping to himself and avoiding questions. Now, it seemed, he was at the center of this unfolding mystery. The forest was dark and silent. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and pine needles. Sam ventured deeper, his flashlight cutting a path through the undergrowth. He could hear the rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs. He felt a growing sense of unease.
He stumbled upon a clearing. In the center was an old abandoned well. He shone his light down the well's dark throat. He could hear a faint sound, a soft whimpering. He leaned closer, his heart pounding.
"Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing in the darkness. "Is someone down there?" The whimpering stopped. He waited, holding his breath. Then, a faint voice reached him.
Help me!
Relief washed over me. Laura was alive. I couldn't believe it at first. The overwhelming fear that had gripped me for hours finally started to fade. My heart, which had been pounding relentlessly, began to slow down. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The forest, which had seemed so menacing, now felt like a sanctuary. I knew I had to act quickly, but for a moment I allowed myself to feel the joy of knowing she was safe.
He rushed back to his car and radioed for backup. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the radio, but he managed to get the message out. The urgency in his voice was unmistakable. He knew that every second counted. The dispatcher assured him that help was on the way, but the minutes felt like hours. He couldn't just sit and wait. He had to do something.
I need ropes, lights, and medical assistance. My voice was firm, but inside I was a mess. I knew the terrain well, and I knew how dangerous it could be. The rescue team needed to be prepared for anything. I couldn't afford to let my emotions get the better of me. Laura needed me to be strong. I can't risk going down the well myself, not without the proper equipment. The thought of her down there, alone and scared, was almost too much to bear. But I knew that rushing in without a plan could make things worse. I had to trust the professionals, even though every instinct screamed at me to go to her.
He waited anxiously, his eyes fixed on the dark mouth of the well. The minutes dragged on, each one an eternity. He tried to keep his mind from imagining the worst, but it was a losing battle. The darkness seemed to mock him, hiding its secrets. He could only hope that Laura was holding on, that she could hear the commotion above and knew that help was coming. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a twig made him jump. His nerves were frayed and the forest seemed alive with unseen threats. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows played tricks on his mind, and he found himself glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone lurking in the darkness.
Where is Laura's attacker? The question burned in my mind. Was he still out there, hiding in the shadows, waiting for another chance to strike? The thought made my blood run cold. I couldn't let my guard down, not for a second. Laura's safety depended on it. Is he still out there, lurking in the shadows? The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees whispering secrets I couldn't understand. I felt a chill run down my spine. The danger wasn't over yet. We had to stay vigilant.
Finally, he saw the flashing lights of the police cars. Relief flooded him. He wasn't alone. The sight of the emergency vehicles brought a sense of hope. The professionals were here, and they would know what to do. He felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The cavalry had arrived. They would get Laura out of there. The rescue team moved with purpose, their faces set with determination. They had done this countless times before, and their confidence was reassuring. He watched as they prepared their equipment, each movement precise and practiced. He just hoped they weren't too late. The fear gnawed at him, a constant nagging doubt. He tried to push it aside, to focus on the positive, but it was always there, lurking in the back of his mind. Time was running out.
"We're here, Sam. Let's get her out safely." The words were a lifeline, a promise that they would do everything in their power to save her. He nodded, grateful for their presence. He knew he had to trust them, to let them do their job.
The team moved quickly, setting up the ropes and lights. Their efficiency was impressive, a well-oiled machine in action. Each member knew their role, and they worked together seamlessly. It was a sight to behold, and it gave him hope. Sam could only watch, his heart pounding as they prepared to rescue Laura. He felt helpless, but he knew that he had done everything he could. Now it was up to them. He prayed silently, willing them to succeed. The fate of the woman he loved was in their hands. The rescue team worked quickly. They lowered a paramedic down the well in a harness. Sam watched anxiously as they carefully brought Laura up.
She was pale and weak, her eyes wide with terror.
She was wrapped in a thick blanket, her violin clutched tightly in her arms. They rushed her to the ambulance. As they drove away, Sam looked back at the dark woods. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched.
He knew the case wasn't closed, not yet. They had rescued Laura, but they still hadn't caught her abductor.
Sam and his team searched the woods all night. Just before dawn, they found him. The drifter was hiding in a shallow cave. He was dirty, disheveled, and looked nothing like the charming stranger who had arrived in Ravendale a few weeks ago.
He didn't resist arrest. He just looked at Sam with cold, empty eyes.
There was no remorse, no explanation, just a chilling silence that spoke volumes. The arrest was swift. The drifter, whose real name turned out to be John Smith, was taken into custody. The town of Ravendale breathed a collective sigh of relief. Their nightmare was finally over. News of Laura's rescue and John Smith's arrest spread through Ravendale like wildfire. The town rejoiced. Laura was their beloved violinist, a symbol of hope and beauty in their quiet world. Her safe return was a victory against the darkness that had threatened to engulf them.
As the sun rose, casting its golden rays over the town, a sense of normalcy returned. The streets were filled with the sounds of children laughing, birds singing, and life going on.
But the events of the past few days had left an indelible mark on Ravendale. Laura was safe. Her abductor was behind bars. Yet a question lingered in the air, unanswered, unresolved. What was John Smith's motive? Why had he taken Laura?
He had not harmed her, nor had he attempted to escape. His silence was a deafening roar, echoing the mystery of his actions.
Sam sat in his office, Laura's case file open before him. He stared at the photo of the young violinist, her eyes sparkling with life, her violin held lovingly in her arms. He knew that some mysteries ran too deep to be solved. John Smith's motive was one of them, and the silence, the chilling, unsettling silence, continued to haunt him.